Tonight on The Wrap, Reform UK's plan to call in the Navy to stop the boats. Can it work and is it legal? France calls the idea a breach of their sovereignty, but is a burn and bounce, pushing Nigel Farage's party into their comfort zone. Also tonight, the Met Office confirms that July was the driest on record for England and Wales, as farmers warn about the impact on the UK's food supply. UEFA considers legal action against Gianni Infantino over his failed World Cup sell-off plan as the English and Welsh FAs withdraw support for the FIFA boss's bid for re-election. And Ariana Grande pulls out of an upcoming musical in London, saying she's going to withdraw from the public eye. Well, we discuss the day's biggest stories with the Deputy Political Editor of The Guardian, Jessica Elgott, and the Political Editor of The Daily Telegraph, Tony Diver. Plus, a first look at the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers. That's coming up at 1:30. Well, hello there. Very good evening to you. Jessica and Tony, welcome as well. We start this evening with Reform UK's plan to deploy the Royal Navy in the Channel and send migrants back to France or Belgium, a plan that Nigel Farage claims would stop the boats in a fortnight. Well, this evening, France's Interior Ministry said the plans would be a violation of French sovereignty, maritime law and international law. The focus on Reform's core issue of immigration comes as some polls show a Labour bounce following Andy Burnham's entry into Downing Street. So, Tony, Jessica, migrant boats intercepted in Operation Fortress, as Reform is calling it, a combined military operation, and politically safe ground, has to be said, for Reform UK.
Well, yes, we haven't seen a lot from Nigel Farage recently. He's had some issues in the headlines, but he has returned with what could be described as the reddest of red meat for Reform UK supporters. That's a military operation in the Channel against small boats, and stick it to the French while you're at it. I mean, could not be more perfectly designed to appeal to his base. Could this be the return of Farage to the headlines?
Jessica.
I mean, it's exactly the same playbook as Reform attempted last summer when they really dominated last summer. They were riding high in the polls. They were talking about asylum hotels. They were talking about small boats. Labour totally cleared the pitch for them. Now he's attempting quite a similar thing again, but my goodness, the circumstances couldn't be more different for Nigel Farage under serious pressure over his donations and finances.
Yes, but you're right, though, filling the summer recess political void in quite a clever way already. Let's get more then. Here's our political correspondent, Alex Rogers.
If the Élysée Palace refuses, make no mistake, His Majesty's Royal Marines will disembark them safely on the very shore they left that morning.
I've just come straight from the room where Reform announced plans for the Royal Navy to intercept small boats in the Channel and return migrants straight back to France. Nigel Farage insists his plan, named Operation Fortress, is legal and would amount to a rescue operation rather than endangering lives at sea, one of the key criticisms of the policy so far.
Operation Fortress will be a combined military operation. It will save lives. It will help the French in fulfilling their job of stopping the boats, and it will save a huge amount of money. We are entirely confident that that falls within other conventions of international law. What is the Royal Navy for? If the Royal Navy is not there to protect this country from invasion, then frankly, I can't see what its purpose is.
But what's striking about the announcement is the number of unanswered questions that still loom. Reform may be confident that they can send boats back to France, but that would require the agreement of the French government, which has already hit back, saying these plans would amount to a violation of their sovereignty. There's also the question of why Reform is announcing this policy now, when the number of small boat crossings is actually down on last year. It also comes just hours after Rupert Lowe, a former colleague and rival, suggested a pact with Nigel Farage, something he didn't entirely discount, perhaps acknowledging that Restore Britain has the ability to eat into his voter base, if it hasn't already.
If you look at my history, in politics over the last few years, I am prepared to do things that make sacrifices if I believe it's in the national interest. I certainly did that in 2019, and I would do whatever I could for us to have a sane centre-right alliance that beat Labour at the next general election.
With Labour enjoying a burn and bounce in the polls and Reform facing yet more questions over donations, we have seen a little less of Farage recently. But now he is back with a bold idea. This latest policy may be daring, but it also points to a party retreating to its comfort zone, one Nigel Farage knows plays well with his base.
So if elected, they would launch the largest military operation, as we're being told, in decades in the English Channel. You know, the French have categorically said this is illegal. Tonight, Reform UK has said that it would be a humanitarian mission and they will not be deterred from that. You know, what we don't know is if calling it a humanitarian mission makes a complete difference to the legality of trying to steer small boats via the Royal Navy back into French waters.
I mean, I think it's very unclear whether that would be legal or not, and I think it will remain unclear until it happens, until it's challenged in the courts. I think that would be the normal run of things. What is very clear is the French position on this, which is they would not allow a Royal Navy warship to dock in their ports or to transport or escort migrants' boats back to their ports. And why would they? But of course, that's the point of this, is to set up a conflict over, are the French doing enough? Why wouldn't they accept these boats to come back? And also to make the point that the government isn't taking strong enough action in order to deter people. I
mean, Reform, and its previous incarnations, to be fair, have often said, why can't we use the Navy? Why can't we nudge these small boats back out? This was part of the suggestion. Nudging the boats back would not be part of it. Pushbacks, as they're calling them. That was not part of this policy, which presumably is, by towing or barging their dinghies away from British waters. But many people in Britain say, they go, why do we rescue them halfway? It means that the people smugglers need, really rubbishy dinghies, and they can overpack them because they know they're going to get rescued. So there are still questions about the fundamentals of whether more could be done in the middle of the English Channel.
Yeah, there absolutely are. And as you say, the people smugglers will play to whatever system is created for them. And we have a system, quite rightly, that means that people who fall into the water in the middle of the channel get rescued because, our own services, our armed services and others have a mandate to try and save lives. But I think you're right. This is about setting up a conflict with the French. And if we look at the change in policy towards France from the government over the last couple of years, Keir Starmer has lent strongly into collaborating with France more, giving the French government money to police these beaches, trying to stop this the taxi boat system that they have at the moment, which is an even more efficient way of getting people onto the dinghies and getting them across the channel. And Farage is essentially saying, all right, I'm going to rip that up. They're not doing enough. We're going to go it alone and just see what happens. And that is partly a bit of political rhetoric, but it probably also does reflect a sort of desire to take back control, as he probably would term it, of this policy ourselves.
Yes, how does the Navy feel about this is another question. And we got the reaction to this reform plan from former Royal Navy Commander Tom Sharp.
So, in other words, on the French side of the line, we go to all of these boats and we intercept them under safety of life at sea. And then, the theory being, you can escort them back into French ports with whatever you're using, an armed warship, 4 ribs full of Royal Marines, and you can go into Calais and say, we just saved their lives, you now have to take them. But that'll just be seen for the fake that it is, because it's not true. And I think perhaps one of the other real issues here is that in that taking that approach, you're very likely to create genuine safety of life at sea issues, because you're now manoeuvring small boats at night in rough seas in one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world.
Yeah, lots of issues with this plan, no doubt. But what about this being a pivot again towards the more right of their voter base, including overtures made with Restore Britain? So, what are they sensing danger from the burn and bounce, do you think?
Yes, I think there's a bit of that. I mean, for the first time in a while, you've actually got Labour ahead in the polls, and then you've got a little cluster below that, which is Reform and the Tories. It's been the other way around for a long time. We've seen Reform being a sort of head and shoulders above everyone else, and then a cluster below them. So that is concerning for Reform HQ. One of the other things they're worried about, though, is this kind of slow rise of Restore, and it's not risen particularly high, and reliable pollsters say they've probably got between 2 and 6% over the last year or so. So it's not a lot, but it might be enough in some of those places where there are high levels of Reform support to just take the edge off enough that a stronger Labour Party under Andy Burnham would be able to take some of those seats off them. So there is a concern there about splitting the vote, basically. And Farage, perhaps surprisingly today, indicated that he would be willing to have conversations with Rupert Lowe, who runs Restore Britain, about whether there's some kind of deal that could be done between the two of them. It's the first time he's said that. And it would be pretty significant on the right of British politics, in a sense, perhaps, that these parties are starting to coalesce together rather than all fighting amongst themselves.
Yes, after a spectacular fallout, one has to remember. So what do you make of that? Because certainly it's fair to say that, you know, the Conservatives lost large numbers of constituencies because of a reform vote in their area. So what do you think about the idea of this coalescing?
Well, one of the things that the pollsters will tell you about the new Labour lead is one of the reasons that's happening is because Andy Burnham is starting to successfully consolidate the progressive vote, so the vote on the sort of centre and left wing, lots of green voters who left Labour coming back to Labour under Andy Burnham. So he's doing that on the other side of the political spectrum. Now, then that poses a problem for the right, obviously, because if they can't do that, if they remain fractured, you know, it's two-party politics at the end of the day. You have to have, essentially, in first past the post, you end up with needing to get a majority to coalesce around a particular party, and if Andy Burnham's doing that on the left, the right needs to do that somehow. And I think this is clear to both Nigel Farage and, frankly, to Rupert Lowe.
And Kemi Badenoch will no doubt be looking on very, very carefully, but will never, do you think, go into bed with reform, or never say never?
I can't see, based on everything that she said so far, I can't see any kind of deal before an election. I could see perhaps some kind of confidence and supply deal after an election, but I really think Kemi Badenoch is very personally opposed to the idea of Nigel Farage and Reform UK, and I can't see her standing down candidates for him. Yes,
so fragmented politics continues, if that is true, and we're not going to return to two-party politics anytime soon, but it's interesting to watch it happen now, isn't it? Well, next tonight, England and Wales both experienced their driest July on record last month, according to provisional Met Office data. It came as the Health Secretary urged everyone to look out for vulnerable people, and the Farmers' Union warned that the hot, dry weather could lead to a shortage of some foods. Here, then, is our climate reporter, Victoria Seabrook.
Britain is baking. Shrinking reservoirs, scorched land, and hosepipe bans. Pain for those whose livelihoods depend on this parched earth, those growing the food this island needs.
So this is milling wheat.
Arable farmer Matt Cully is harvesting wheat 3 weeks early and 50% less than he expected.
I'm going to lose around £20,000 just on my milling wheat crop. And that is being mirrored around the area that we work in. We've got very expensive fertiliser bills for next year already. How's that going to get paid for? Those are the real questions that we're asking ourselves. And do we ultimately not even think about planting this autumn for next year because we haven't got the money to invest?
It means food price rises are likely and shortages down the line not being ruled out.
What we've already seen is that there's been a shortage of cucumbers, and that's because of what's happening with the heat wave in other countries. So it really depends exactly which crops and it's going to be. It could be some of our irrigated crops where growers may run out of water. It could be some of our fruit crops, depending on what happens at harvest.
These maize crops are about 4 foot tall right now, but they should be at least twice the height, far above my head, and you shouldn't even be able to see me through them. But since the farmer planted them in March, he's had just a third of the rainfall that he would have expected. And these lower leaves should be bright green, but have withered to a crisp. And of course, it's a problem much bigger than just this field. England and Wales have just recorded their driest July on records going back 190 years. New Met Office data suggests England received just 6.5 millimetres of rain on average, Wales 9.3 millimetres, both around 90% less than what we'd expect for July. And it's not just farmers feeling the heat. Much of England under a yellow or amber heat health alert, with temperatures over 30 degrees expected to strain both vulnerable people and the NHS as a whole.
Well, we have a major capital investment programme underway now across the NHS. And, of course, we're now having to look at making sure the new neighbourhood health centres, new hospital building programmes is all building in the ability to respond to high heat temperatures. This is also about prevention and in the community, making sure that all of us know to look out for elderly relatives, for those who are vulnerable.
Britain's hot and dry weather is still taking us by surprise, but it's sadly in line with what climate scientists have forecast. Some changes to our climate now already baked in. Just how dramatic they are is not set in stone. Victoria Seabrook, Sky News.
Well, there are absolutely serious consequences to there, aren't there? But the figures are unbelievable. Some 19 counties recorded less than or equal to 1 millimetre of rainfall in July. Just 6.5 millimetres of rain was measured across the month of July, or 10% of the long-term average for the month. You know, rainfall records which began in 1836 being shattered, sunshine as well, 305.6 hours of sunshine across the month clocked up by England, and still in many areas no rain on the horizon.
Yeah, and the bodies who are sounding the alarm about, you know, just how serious this is. This is, you know, the third drought in 5 years. NFU, the National Trust. These are not Extinction Rebellion types. You know, this is the seriousness of the climate crisis and what it means in terms of actual real life effects, potential food shortages, farmers' crops failing, you know, NHS having to cancel operations, close wards because they're just too hot to keep patients in. We've seen reports of that over the last few weeks. You know, this is real and happening now. And it feels like, you know, not only is there very little about the kind of climate change on the political agenda, but also very little in terms of what we talk about resilience, because it's here. Lots of these effects are happening in the country right now, and what are we doing in terms of our housing infrastructure, in terms of our food supplies, in terms of, you know, protections against droughts, loads of those, you know, building reservoirs. There's so much that we should be doing to kind of insulate against the effects of climate change, and it still seems very difficult to talk about.
Yes, rules of wooded areas around property, which you get in France, for example, and yet we've seen terrible wildfires in France. I mean, a huge amount of area that's been burning there. So is this sharpening the minds, do you think, both to deal with heavy rainfall in the winter and to deal with what we've got now, which is drought conditions, with no infrastructure spending on things like reservoirs? So is this beginning to focus people's attention, do you think?
Well, I think you're right, Jess. I think it's actually not something that you hear about particularly often in Westminster or in Whitehall. And, of course, there are bodies...
Unless it's criticism of Ed Miliband, the former, you know, energy secretary.
Yes.
Probably the only person who did talk about it, actually.
Zero plans, yeah.
Well, yes, but, I mean, there are also interesting cases of where you've got these things coming into conflict. You know, the government has rules and individual local councils have rules against people putting air conditioning in their homes because, of course, those things heat the environment, they use a lot of energy. But at the same time, if you stop people from putting them in their homes, then the homes warm up and then you see the health effects from that, and that puts additional pressure on the NHS. So these debates are not as simple as, do you think that climate change is happening or do you not? Because, of course, everyone thinks that it is. The question is, what's the policy response to that? And I do think the kind of turbulence that we've had in British politics over the last few years has not particularly helped the kind of long-term thinking that you need to do, and the investment in, frankly, not particularly sexy things that voters are not necessarily going to get excited about, but which might make a difference and help us make us more resilient and adaptive to this kind of weather.
Yes, and all underlined by more pictures today. This from the Rhondda Valley, where South Wales Fire and Rescue Service have declared a major incident because of what they're calling a significant wildfire. I think it's been put out, it's reignited as well. Crews have been dealing with this since Saturday. So yet another incident in the UK of a forest fire and the attempt to get it under control amid, you know, tinder-dry conditions.
And, you know, this is so... These things feel very unusual for the... Of course, we've had heat waves in the past, in British history, but the relentlessness in which this is happening, you know, almost every summer, we're seeing record temperatures. You know, my children's school was closed for a couple of days because of high temperatures, and the school's now trying to raise off the parents, you know, 65 grand's worth of air conditioning. That is... But just because it's not safe for the children to be in these classrooms, because they're Victorian buildings, they're built to retain heat, they're just not safe for small children to be in. And That's extraordinary that that Britain is in that situation where they're having to close schools because of overheating. And I think we need to talk about long-term things we do to tackle climate change, but we really need to be talking very seriously about the short-term things we do to become more resilient for summers like this, which are going to become the norm.
Yeah, and potentially help for farmers who are already, delving into their winter feed to feed stock that would normally be on lovely green grass right now. As I said, lots of implications for that. Now, there is growing pressure on the FIFA president, Gianni Infantino, tonight after his failed plan to sell off stakes in the World Cup. Sky News understands that the English FA is withdrawing its support for Infantino's re-election bid, while UEFA today warned FIFA that it is considering legal action. Let's get more. Here's our sports correspondent, Rob Harris.
Gianni Infantino clings on to power for now, but UEFA has instigated the next move in its attempts to bring down the FIFA president. Letters of support for his re-election are being withdrawn from across Europe. It was during the World Cup that FIFA was claiming that Infantino had 200 of the 211 World Football Associations already backing his bid for a new 4-year term as president next year. But in Europe, those letters are being withdrawn. We heard from Wales of a failure of leadership and not putting the best interests of football first. England also formally renounced its support. Serbia announced the attempts to sell off stakes in the World Cup seriously damaged the reputation and credibility of both FIFA and its president. Sweden confirmed UEFA is actively looking to come up with an alternative candidate. The deadline for candidates is in November, with the election due in March. We've heard nothing from Infantino about this increasing loss of confidence in his leadership, particularly from Europe and North America. The last statement from him was in the early hours of Saturday morning, announcing he was abandoning this attempt to launch a World Cup subsidiary with private investment after accepting it had proved too divisive. The accusation has been that he was offering this development cash to be boosted around the world as some sort of maybe incentive to gain support across the world of football. And intriguingly, just before the start of the World Cup in Mexico, when I asked Infantino about criticism of the high ticket prices, he brought up, in a way, the voting system.
I've also heard saying, well, this money just goes to the federations, to secure power or stuff like this. Well, tell me, where should the money go otherwise? Democracy is not just an empty word. And if we accept democracy, we have to accept the one member, one vote situation.
I never mentioned in the question anything about using money from the World Cup to secure votes, but it was certainly on Infantino's mind. But his presidency is now rapidly imploding. Infantino and many of his staff are facing the threat of legal action from UEFA over this attempt to launch FIFA Forward Enterprise. Officials, including Arsene Wenger, who has a senior development role, have been told that their correspondence could all be requested as part of legal action as UEFA ups the ante and tries to increase the pressure on Infantino to bring him down. This is all a concerted effort to end Infantino's presidency. But for now, he remains in power. But for how long?
Well, UEFA's lawyer has been quoted as suggesting that legal proceedings are reasonably anticipated because stakeholders believe the plan was fundamentally incompatible with the proper governance of football. Telling some 18 FIFA executives they need to retain data, documents, emails, any electronic messages as part of, potential evidence. So the stakes are high. Do you understand why Infantino got so close to Trump ahead of the World Cup in America? But did he just take it too far, do you think?
Well, I think, for those who are very suspicious of Infantino, there's lots of things that you can see in the World Cup and the way that was arranged that UEFA and other associations were prepared to bear, the hydration breaks, so you could have adverts, the withdrawing of a red card. There was a suspension of Cristiano Ronaldo's red card so that he could start in the first couple of games. And all of those things, I think, were you could just about bear all of those things just on their own as kind of commercial imperatives for the game. But they showed the way that commercial interests could potentially impact the game. And I think that they now see the direction of travel that it was going, and this has sort of blown up all of their worst fears about the way that potentially what does it mean if commercial stakes are the highest imperative when it comes to football? Obviously, it then means decisions like that which affect the fair play of the game, and that's what that will be the case they're building against Gianni Infantino for sure.
Yeah, but I suppose the American market shows there is money to be made, and this could have raised billions of dollars, is the point they would, be suggesting. But, against the spirit of the game, Europe now trying to find an alternative candidate to coalesce around and persuade other, regional sporting bodies to back. It's, how do you see this playing out? Is he a goner?
Well, it certainly seems like it. It's hard to see how he can survive when the entire world of football, all around the world, is against him, and he's going into an election. So, yeah, I assume people will coalesce around others. I find fascinating about this story is how quickly it's moved. It was within 10 days we've gone from knowing nothing about this plan, and he is a guy who, as you say, these national groups will reluctantly back, but they think he's done basically an all right job. To barely clinging on to that job, and all of this detail having emerged, and now legal action and everything else, it's removed remarkably quickly. But and the only other thing, and I'm not a huge football fan, and I didn't tune into every World Cup game, but I did watch the opening ceremony, in which there is all of the kind of messaging of football. It's all about global unity. It's about working together. It's about national borders and politics and money not mattering as much as the love of the game. And this, from what we see, is basically just the complete opposite of that. And he's the guy meant to be running the thing. It's extraordinary.
Yeah. We'll see how that plays out. But, UEFA looking at legal action, English and Welsh FAs, coalescing around him not getting re-elected as well. So we'll see how that plays out. Lots more still to come in the next part of our hour. We have some breaking news for you coming up, and we will take a look at what is making the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers. Back in a moment.
jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party.
I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Hello there, welcome back. You are watching The Wrap. In a few minutes' time, we'll be taking a look at the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers and discussing them in further detail with Tony Diver and Jessica Elgott from The Telegraph and The Guardian. But we also have some breaking news, and the Prime Minister has announced what he's going to do to address concerns about the prisoner early release scheme, which he suspended, if you remember, last month upon entering Downing Street. Well, let's bring in our political correspondent, Lucy McDade. Welcome, Lucy. What are we hearing then?
Yeah, so of course that controversial early release scheme, as you were saying, tonight, Number 10 confirming that rape and serious child sex offences and grooming gang offences, they will be exempt from that early release scheme. So anyone, any individual in that category won't be eligible for early release. And that scheme was due to start from September. Andy Burnham saying tonight that he doesn't feel comfortable. I've spoken to ministers this evening who say they don't feel comfortable with any prisoners being released early, but ultimately they have an issue with prison capacity, don't they? So Andy Burnham has said, I want to be honest, I wanted to go even further, as I know there will still be concerns about other offenders having their sentence shortened, but it's not possible without the prison system reaching capacity and collapsing, which would put public safety at much greater risk. Now, we saw, didn't we, that prisons were almost at max capacity before the general election in 2024. Labour came in, they had to release prisoners then, and we've seen backlash, haven't we, from so many people, politicians, but victims as well. And even tonight with this announcement, there will be victims really, really unhappy. The victim domestic abuse commissioner, for example, tonight saying that it's wrong. Andrew Harper's widow, the Thames Valley police officer who was killed in 2019, she has already come out this evening saying that this is appalling. Interestingly, in this Number 10 press release, there are a number of things, I think, to pick up on. The first batch of early releases will be delayed until October. Andy Burnham saying that that will give probation officers time to prepare. It will give victims more time to be notified, get the support that they need. Also, Andy Burnham saying what a number of people have actually been suggesting to him, that he should free up space on the women's prison estate. He says he'll look at that. And also review these outdated IPP sentences, which I know you guys have covered with your newspapers plenty of times, that many people have been calling for a long time. Well,
this is indefinite sentences.
Yeah, indefinite sentences that were abolished many years ago, but still, I think, over a couple of thousand people still in prison having served those sentences. So a couple of things there that Andy Burnham is saying that he'll look at to try and ease things even more.
OK, Lucy, thank you very much indeed for the moment. Time now then to take a look at the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers, and a number of them are leading on that, including The Guardian, which leads on the news that rapists, child sex abusers and groomers will be excluded from the early release plans to ease overcrowding in prisons. The Times reports that those convicted of manslaughter will still be eligible for early release. It is the same story in The Sun. Cop killers will go free, is how the paper reports it, with the widow of PC Andrew Harper, whose killers could be released early, labelling it disgusting. Farage's sinking ship is the headline. Meanwhile, in the Mirror, with the paper reporting that Reform UK is in chaos, with experts criticising its plans to use the Navy to stop migrant boat crossings. The Eye goes with the drought, with new figures today from the Met Office showing that England and Wales had their driest July since records began in 1836. The Daily Express has news of trials of what's been described as a game-changer drug, which could help people to better control high blood pressure. The Financial Times goes with a legal challenge Apple has launched against the government's bid to gain access to encrypted iPhone data. The embattled FIFA president is on the front of the Star, with the paper claiming Gianni Infantino wants Donald Trump to help save his job. The Metro has a story about a 26-year-old man who lost 15 stone after taking the weight loss jab Mounjaro, while reporting a study which shows around 4% of Britons are unemployed due to obesity. Well, let us talk more then with Tony Diver and Jessica Elgott. And actually, your paper is leading on the news tonight that the Prime Minister has laid out the categories of offender who he wants excluded from the possibility of early release. Some people now, under what's going to come in October, to be released after serving just one third of their sentence.
Yeah, and it does, really lay bare in the Prime Minister's statement tonight when he talks about, how he wanted to go much further than this, but the prison capacity is just so low that he's having to make these incredibly difficult calls, and calls which he will possibly rightly so get some questions of criticism for. So rapists, child sexual abusers, grooming gang perpetrators, they will be excluded from these early release plans. But that still means some fairly heinous crimes. People who've committed them will be allowed to go free. Manslaughter, some killers, some domestic abusers, they will be part of this early release scheme, and you will get, voices, I'm sure, over the coming weeks of victims of those perpetrators who are likely to go free in the coming weeks, criticising that.
Yeah, I know this is going to be the lead for your paper as well, with Andy Burnham, writing for you specifically about the fact that there shouldn't be so many women in jails as well, and these people who are left in jail with indeterminate sentences, indefinite timeframes, in fact, who should actually eventually be let out because they're still waiting for probation officers to say, or parole boards to say when they can go.
That's right. He's written for our paper tonight, and that is his argument, basically, is that he needs to be turning over every stone he can in the MOJ, looking for ways to solve this problem. I mean, the government says that 98% of the male estate is heading towards being full at the moment, which they say is unsustainable. Someone I spoke to in Whitehall this afternoon said that the Prime Minister really did want to go further. They really did want to include manslaughter, which would have included 2 of the 3 killers of PC Harper, who are among those who could be released early. But they were concerned, based on the modelling that they'd done, that they were heading towards what was described as an Armageddon scenario, which is basically where all of the cells become full, you reach 100% capacity, and then you have to do an emergency release scheme, and it means you don't get the chance to do a review like this, spend time thinking about who you want to release and who you don't, and trying to do it in the best way that you can. You just have to get people out of jails, because otherwise you gum up the entire court system and you stop police being able to arrest people, and it leads to all sorts of awful consequences. So the Prime Minister does seem fairly regretful about the situation, which, to be fair to him, he inherited from his predecessor. But there will,
well, the Tories started doing this first, didn't they, to be fair? I mean,
that's right.
Began early release. But, I mean, the Sun's picked up on that very point about PC Andrew Harper, his widow, Lissy Harmer, saying this is disgusting. I'm appalled rather, and bristling with anger to hear that Andrew's killers are soon to be free to roam the streets. What abhorrent message does this send? How dare ministers say the killing of a police officer is not enough of a sickening crime that deserves the stiffest of punishments? The level of disrespect the government is showing to Andrew and other victims and to their loved ones, such as me, is beyond contempt. Goes on to remind people that the killers of Andrew have shown no remorse. They robbed us of our future. It sticks in people's throats, doesn't it? The early release of people who are serious offenders, including those who've committed domestic abuse, who are not included as part of the Prime Minister's list of exclusions.
Absolutely, and I think all of us will remember that terrible case of PC Andrew Harper, and and it's not surprising to hear that anger from his widow about his killers being released early, and of course, that it's almost an impossible choice, isn't it? Because if you're doing a scheme like this, if you're having to free up these kinds of prison places, then ultimately the people you're releasing are going to have committed these crimes, and there will be. I'm sure we will see egregious examples over the coming weeks, more and more. This was a very high-profile one, but there will be others, of people who are having to be released long before their victims feel it is just, or that they have served the right sentences. And, that's a failure on multiple levels across multiple governments to invest in prison places. And, of course, you'd hope there would be a review of other things. But ultimately, if you free up places in the women's estate, if you need to arrest more men, that's not necessarily going to solve the problem that you have. So, of course, you can look at things like that, but ultimately the problem is the places in the estates for these kinds of offences.
Yeah, already reaction. The Victims Commissioner for England and Wales, Claire Waxman, said that early release plans have been a source of shock, distress and uncertainty for victims. Many have been let down by poor communication. The Domestic Abuse Commissioner, Dame Nicole Jacob said not excluding domestic abusers is wrong and puts victims' lives at risk. And the Andy Burnham plans suggest building more prison places by the early 2030s and also creating what they call tough new probation measures to create a prison outside of prison for offenders. For example, alerts warning offenders if they risk breaching an exclusion zone. So giving prisoners who've been released exclusion zones, presuming that they will be tracked and wear tags, random drug testing for 1,000 offenders every month, and moves to double the number of regions using chemical suppression to help manage the drivers of sexual offending. I mean, all these extra things they're suggesting. We've got your front page now as well, actually. So, you know, there we go. PC Harper killers will still be freed early, which for many people is utterly extraordinary. This is a police officer who was killed in the most terrible of circumstances.
That's right, and his widow has fought a campaign to try and increase sentences for people who kill police officers, whether that's by murder or manslaughter. A successful campaign, it must be said. But yes, I mean, of course, there will be victims everywhere who are feeling very uncertain about people who've committed crimes they've been affected by being out on the street. But the other thing we should also say is that every time we have an early release scheme, there are stories about people who go out and reoffend. And so this isn't just about victims who are feeling concerned about their welfare and feeling uneasy about the punishment that's been dealt, which of course is important. Is also there will straight away be stories about people who go out and offend, and there will be more victims as a result of this policy. That is the unavoidable fact of doing these releases. And, you know, Andy Burnham will, of course, feel the political heat of that when it happens.
OK, I think we'll get a lot more reaction. That story's just broken, plenty more reaction and, you know, politicians giving their views as well. In the meantime, let us go to the front of the Daily Mirror, which is pretty excoriating on the Reform UK's plans to bring in the Navy to ship migrants from the English Channel back towards French shores, something that Reform UK's Home Affairs spokesman Zia Youssef said would be the largest military operation in the English Channel since World War II.
Yeah, that's a metaphor they love to use. I think Reform UK, we've heard it about quite a few things. And yes, that's an attempt by Reform UK to get back on the front foot, to, you know, the same summer playbook that they used last year very successfully to try and dominate the airwaves. Of course, now, this time, Nigel Farage is fighting a by-election in Clacton, which he's called himself, fighting against Count Binface, and facing all sorts of questions about gifts and finances and falling further down the polls, with Labour overtaking him very recently. So this is, of course, you know, quite a eye-catching scheme, isn't it, to the idea that the Royal Navy would escort boats back to France. It'd be difficult to see how many... I'd be interested to know how many members of the public genuinely believe this to be a realistic plan, that the French would, you know, accept these boats. But clearly there's a way for them to try and get back on the front foot.
Yeah. Candidates list, I'm guessing at this point. This is where you're very glad you don't work on radio, I think, actually, because it's very long. And it's a very long... Is it 3 foot as well? I can't remember now. This
Is it a record number of candidates?
I think it's a record number of candidates, isn't it? How many pages have we got? 34 running in total. There you go. So the candidates in the upcoming Clacton by-election. Yes, just your thoughts on this policy then, and you know why it's necessary now. We know that Reform tries to own the summer recess quite successfully in the past, to be fair, when it seems other politicians do take their holidays. But you know, do they have to go to this call because of the Burnham bounds? Is that why we're seeing this now, do you think?
Well, I think it's both of those things. I mean, I think this is Reform attempting to get back on the front foot after a difficult few weeks in the polls, and some difficult headlines for Nigel Farage, who has not been out very much recently. But yeah, I mean, there are obviously concerns about this policy. I mean, it wasn't long ago that we were talking about the kind of moribund state of the Royal Navy and the fact that we don't have any warships, and that we're having to escort Russian frigates through the Channel using civilian boats and all this kind of thing. So perhaps Reform is first planning to invest in a more significant fleet before they're going to launch this policy, because I can't see how they're going to do it with the kind of firepower that we've got at the moment.
Well, I mean, in fact, the Financial Times has it on the front as well, and they say some defence figures were sceptical of the plan's viability. Tom Sharp, who we certainly spoke to earlier, a former Navy commander, said it's doable for the Navy to perform this role, but we'd have to stop pretty much everything else we're doing, which, as we know from Iran, is not necessarily a good idea. It's yes, bottom of that front page. I interrupted you. Sorry, Tony. Yeah.
No. Well, that was the point I was making. Is do you really want to have to give up on everything else in order to do this? And I suspect this is more about political signalling than it is about really serious policy making. But saying we're going to get tough and we're going to deploy the military to do it. I mean, as you say, Reform has deployed the military theoretically many times in their policy announcements. It's one of their kind of go-to solutions for things. But there'll be many people who see that and are sympathetic towards that as a solution and think the French have been too soft.
Yeah, French have said no, of course, to this for the moment. The Eye, dramatic pictures, as we've seen again. The driest July in 190 years, 1836. These figures date back.
And those kinds of figures of those scorched earth will be very familiar to everyone up and down the country when they're looking at their gardens, they're looking at their local parks. You know, it's really symbolic of how the climate is affecting our country. I think it's a third drought in 5 years, which is, you know, this kind of hot July is becoming so normalised and causing lots of really big disruption, whether that's to food production, whether that's to water, whether that's, you know, to the NHS. You know, lots of those wards not air conditioned, you know, appointments having to be cancelled in some parts of the NHS. And so, yeah, it's certainly been a very hot summer.
Yes, and the Eye reminding us that firefighters are battling this wildfire in South Wales, in the Rhondda Valley, the size of 210 football pitches, whereas your paper, The Guardian, pictures the wildfires we've seen in Greece as well, which is, I mean, they talked about gales there. You can't put a fire out in a gale. That's the problem, isn't it? So yet another nation, you know, that have seen devastating wildfires with these tinderbox conditions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and it's happening every year now, isn't it, in Southern Europe especially, but, you know, it will be a concern that it's going to move here. I was interested by the line on the Eye's front page that it also meant that we had a boost for solar power with record electricity generation. So, you know, extremely thin silver lining to the whole thing is perhaps, you know, a boost for green energy as well at the same time. But, yeah, these wildfires are going to become a massive concern, and you know, as a country we're going to have to adapt to dealing with them because they're not a freak event anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. Both of you, thank you for that. We will get more from Tony and Jessica in just a moment, including why Ariana Grande says she's stepping back from public life.
An interview that lasted nearly 5 minutes. We talked about Prime Minister Starmer. We talked about the special relationship with who he said. It was a jam-packed interview. I'll tell you what he told me, and I'll explain why you can't hear the call.
I'm Mark Stone, and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Have you seen what Donald Trump's been up to? In the Rose Garden, in the East Wing.
100 days in and back with the grassroots of this MAGA movement.
It feels a little bit like he's a king, not a president.
He is a king.
I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too.
Everything in America feels kind of torn in two right now, and it has been an intense few weeks for Minneapolis.
How many more people have to die? This is not America.
A large and growing protest movement. They're vocal and they're angry.
Are these immigration rates?
Unbelievable we've come to this.
We just arrived in Doha, just ahead of President Trump, and look at that. The horse-backed military and beyond them, the skyline of a city transformed.
There seems to be some sort of a shooting, what appear to be shots fired at the White House Correspondents' Dinner.
What do America's Christian faithful make of the president's pop at the Pope?
The ones that vote for him are going to vote for him through thick and thin.
Before anybody criticizes the Pope, they need to think more than twice.
Mark Stone from Sky News. Will you stop buying Russian energy?
Is there any assurance for Palestinian self-determination?
Of course. It's a big shift by President Trump.
This post of Trump, it's a big shift. It's a big shift. It's very positive.
Sky News, the full story first.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
Who's funnier?
Being a Sky News journalist. A special edition of The World with me, Yalda Hakim.
Pakistan has the right to respond.
You're like, what?
Historic day here today. Congratulations, this is a huge moment. But what happens now? What's the best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
Who's funnier?
Being a Sky News journalist. A special edition of The World with me, Yalda Hakim.
Pakistan has the right to respond.
You're like, what?
Historic day here today. Congratulations, this is a huge moment. But what happens now?
Hear that whistle and that crunch? We know that they're coming from the south of the city where there's a column of Russian armoury. I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul. Look at that sheet of flames, and that has happened within minutes, and now it's coming from both sides and it's moving this way.
Now, the singer and actor Ariana Grande will take a step back from the public spotlight and will no longer star in a London theatre production planned for next year. A representative for the musician said she'd been the subject of endless, ongoing public scrutiny. The Wicked star will take a break after her Eternal Sunshine tour wraps up next month. Well, earlier, Sky News spoke to journalist and board member of Hacked Off, Emma Jones, about the pressures that celebrities face.
It's difficult now because, you know, stars aren't just stars on the stage or the screen. They're also having to deal with social media and the commentary that people place on them. And she's spoken about finding that quite difficult before. I think it's undoubtedly worse for women. I think obviously it's difficult for anyone in the spotlight, but I think issues around weight and fame are inextricably linked to many of our greatest stars over the years, and I don't think anything's changed. I think, if anything, it's got worse.
Yes, and she's talked, hasn't she? She's actually publicly addressed comments about her weight and the fact that people have looked at her body. But I mean, it is endlessly difficult, is it not, for people like Ariana Grande?
I think this is just one of the most difficult cases to talk about because, you know, lots of us would agree that women's bodies should be off limits for sort of public discussion, sort of tearing the way celebrities look apart. We all know how they suffer from that. And also, I think there is some genuine concern about Ariana Grande's health and her appearance, particularly in the most recent music video that she did, and, you know, pictures that she has posted online. They have sparked what I think is not just judgmental comments, but genuine concern. And that, I think, is related to why she wants to take this step out of the public spotlight. But of course, she has condemned people for talking about that in the past and said they shouldn't place judgment on her, they shouldn't discuss her body. And, you know, it's understandable why she might, you know, also feel like that. It's a very, very difficult one.
And she lives in this world where every time you release an album or you appear in a film, you're expected to travel around the world to promote yourself, and therefore you're in the public eye all the time because you're contracted to do so. You cannot escape because you know, that is part of your contract, effectively, to keep promoting yourself.
That's right. I mean, you are, if someone like her is endlessly in the public eye, but also you have, you know, in her case, a lot of extremely committed fans who, you know, almost feel like they have a relationship with her. They follow everything she does. They watch her all the time. Every video, every interview, every post on Instagram or whatever. This is, it's just as a group of highly motivated people who are concerned about her. Meanwhile, you have a load of highly motivated people who don't like her for whatever reason, and they feel they can hide behind a screen and say unpleasant things. So, you know, if you're someone who is feeling like you don't want your body discussed online, which is obviously a perfectly reasonable position to have, it's pretty difficult to escape. And you can see why you would want to pull out of doing a show in London where all you're going to have is a load more people taking pictures of you and then talking about them.
Well, she is on the front page of The Sun. So too is Rod Liddle, the fantastic journalist who just started appearing on The Wrap, often on a Friday night with Gillian Joseph, and is a master of the art opinionated, amusing, thoughtful, insightful, and the very sad news of his death today.
Yeah, I mean, he certainly was like a huge character in the British media. He was a former Guardian columnist, in fact. I mean, he ranged across all of it, didn't he? From the Today programme to the Guardian, to the Sun, to the Sunday Times, Spectator. He really had quite an extraordinary and eclectic career of who, often quite controversial takes. But that was part of what he did. He was a challenging kind of personality and a great writer.
Yeah, a sentence from you.
Yeah, well, I mean, just today, the sheer number of people online who've come out with personal stories about him, not flashy stories, but just stories about things that he'd said or done. They were all funny and, most of them unrepeatable. It shows you, he's a real loss to a lot of people, and people will miss him.
We'll certainly miss him on the Wrap, and, readers, listeners will too, certainly. So Rod Liddle on the front page of The Sun, whose death was announced today. Let's take a look at the weather.
You're looking happy.
Well, the forecast looks good.
So you've sorted the travel insurance then?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors Sky News Weather.
Well, this week will bring some much-needed rain, but probably not much to the drought-stricken south. Scotland will have a mostly wet start tomorrow with heavy rain in places, while Ireland and the western parts of the UK will see a scattering of showers. Scotland will see prolonged rain becoming confined to the north during the morning, with locally heavy and potentially thundery showers following into southern parts. Elsewhere, sunny spells, a scattering of showers, some torrential and thundery. They will be concentrated in the west, with eastern England staying mainly dry, won't be quite as hot in the south. Showers will become more widespread during the afternoon, but East Anglia and the southeast of England will hardly see any, while the west of Ireland will tend to dry up. Northern parts will see further showers or more prolonged rain on Wednesday. The south looks mainly dry. Again, there'll be just a few showers there, mainly in the southwest, but it will be cooler and windier.
All Clear Travel Insurance proudly sponsors Sky News Weather.
Well, still to come here on The Wrap, the Prime Minister risks the anger of victims as he announces plans to continue with the prisoner early release scheme, with the exception of some violent offenders. That's next.
Jubilation in the streets, while some emotional.
This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party.
I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
Who's funnier?
Being a Sky News journalist. A special edition of The World with me, Yalda Hakim.
Pakistan has the right to respond.
You're like, what?
Historic day here today. Congratulations, this is a huge moment. But what happens now?
Tonight on The Wrap, the Prime Minister announces a block on the early release of some prisoners, but others will soon go free. Those guilty of rape, serious child sex and grooming offences will stay behind bars, but the killers of PC Andrew Harper will be released. His family call that disgusting. Also tonight, Iran denies Donald Trump's claims that peace talks are underway, as the US president says time is running out for Tehran.
This is the last chance. This is not something that, if it doesn't happen, this is the last chance for them to sign a good document.
A convicted fraudster tracked down in Tenerife by Sky News is given an extended sentence. And in sport, another injury blow for Emma Raducanu as she's forced to withdraw from the US Open. Well, we discuss the day's biggest stories with the Deputy Political Editor of The Guardian, Jessica Elgott, and the Political Editor of The Daily Telegraph, Tony Diver. Plus, a look at the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers coming up in about half an hour's time. Well, hello, good evening, and good evening to Tony and to Jessica and to Lucy, who we'll speak to in just a moment. But we start this hour with some breaking news tonight, and the Prime Minister has announced what he's going to do to address concerns about the prisoner early release scheme, which he suspended last month upon entering Downing Street. Well, those convicted of rape, serious child sex offences and grooming will be excluded, but controversially, those jailed for manslaughter could still get out early. So let's get the details then and bring in our political correspondent, Lucy McDade. Andy Burnham suggesting he's done all he can, but the capacity of specifically the male prison estate makes early release necessary, though it's being pushed back a month, isn't it? Give us the details.
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, this is because of the issue with prison capacity. There are warnings that if space isn't freed up, then by November we will be at maximum capacity. So, as we saw with the Conservatives, Labour has to do something about this. Andy Burnham, it was kind of his first real big challenge when he became Prime Minister 2 weeks ago. He said he would pause that programme, review it. Well, they've Number 10 have come back tonight saying that rapists, serious child sex offenders and grooming gang offenders will now be exempt from early release. That scheme, as you were just saying, is now delayed from September until October. Andy Burnham saying that'll give probation officers more time to prepare, also give victims more time to be notified and get the support that they might need. But it's worth pointing towards those many, many victims who are tonight really, really furious that their perpetrators will still be eligible. Not least, you've got Lissy Harper. She's the widow of PC Andrew Harper. He was a Thames Valley police officer killed in 2019. Now, there were 3 killers sentenced there. The one, it's worth pointing out, who was driving the car that killed Andrew Harper, he was given a certain sentence, which means he will have to serve his full sentence. And Number 10, very keen to stress that this evening. But 2 of the killers convicted of manslaughter, they will still be eligible for early release at some point. Lissy Harper tonight saying that this is disgusting. She is beyond appalled, bristling with anger to hear that Andrew's killers are soon to be free to roam the streets. The Domestic Abuse Commissioner has also spoken tonight, saying that it's wrong that domestic abusers could be freed early. She says that that puts victims at risk. I think the way that Andy Burnham has tried to communicate this announcement is by saying he understands these feelings. He's written in the Telegraph, hasn't he, tonight, saying that he wanted to go even further. I'm just reading it now. I know there will be concerns about those who will still be released early. I have pushed the very limits of what is possible to do. He's talking about a number of ways in which we could free up more space. He's spoken about reviewing the women's prison estate. Is there any space to be freed up there? And also these IPP sentences, which have long been talked about, they're abolished. But the abolition of those sentences wasn't retrospective, so still 2,000 or so prisoners in prison serving those sentences today.
So these are indeterminate, indefinite, where you're left in jail. And
yeah, well, even if you served your full sentence, if you didn't pass a kind of a test from the parole board, you would still be kept in prison. Yeah. Plenty of criticism about those sentences, the psychological effect that they've had, calls for years that they should be freed. Well, I suppose at desperate times, calls for a Prime Minister to look at every possible angle to try and let people out of prison.
Yes, let's see if we can see the front of the Daily Telegraph then. As as you suggested, Andy Burnham has written for your paper, Tony. PC Harper killers will still be freed is your top line. And in fact, the Chief Constable of Thames Valley Police, Jason Hoggs, has just issued a statement as well on the case of PC Andrew Harper, saying, I'm beyond disappointed the government is continuing to allow PC Andrew Harper's killers to be released early from prison, despite the overwhelming recent public outcry. It is simple. If Andrew's killers were convicted today, they would receive life sentences due to the law that was created in his name. They would not be eligible for early release. So, you know, real consternation from them. But in the statement we've had from Downing Street tonight, the suggestion that they are trying to push the prison building programme to the fastest rate since the Victorian era, with 14,000 new prison places expected by 2031. I don't know if that's new or whether it's just the better way of selling it that Andy Burnham is trying to promote. Tough new probation measures, what they call a prison outside of prison, so that you are tracked and monitored, that it's exclusion zones for those who've been released. So all sorts of extra things they're trying to do to soften the blow, which will really upset people, that people are coming out early.
Yes, well, actually, I can tell you exactly which bits of this are new.
OK, good.
Because I spent some time trying to work it out. And the answer is the exemptions for rapists and serious child sex offenders, the fact that they will not be released under this early release scheme, that is new. There is also this presumption in favour of people who have been released having GPS trackers on them and those other kinds of measures that you were just describing, which are all about basically monitoring people once they've already been let out to make sure they don't either reoffend, breach the bail conditions. In the case of domestic abusers, go into the homes of the people that they previously domestically abused, all that kind of thing. Those are the two main things, basically. The rest of it, the fastest prison building places ever, all of the other stuff was previously announced under the Starmer government, and it was intended to soften the blow when Starmer announced it. Now it's intended to soften the blow for Andy Burnham. Now, clearly, under Keir Starmer, it was felt by the MOJ that they didn't have enough capacity to keep some of these people behind bars. It seems that Andy Burnham's review has concluded that they do have enough capacity to do that. So whether that's they're taking a little bit more of a risk, they're happy to have a little bit less flex in the system, and their modelling perhaps shows that the prison numbers are not going to go up too much this autumn. But for people that I was speaking to in government today, the one thing that they are desperate to avoid is that number going up from 90%, 98% and hitting 100%, because once that happens, all hell breaks loose and it's extremely difficult to control. So Andy Burnham walking a very fine line tonight, but hoping that the public will say, well, you at least inherited this problem, you didn't cause it. Yeah, I mean, people at home, we're sitting there thinking, we talk about damage limitation, about nearly every subject, you know. We haven't built reservoirs, so we've got droughts and hosepipe bans. We haven't built prisons, so we can't accommodate them. So we let people out after 1/3 of their sentence now. 1/3. Yeah. I mean, what's gone wrong with Britain over the last 20 years?
The British state is ultimately crumbling because of a lack of long-term investment in all sorts of things. And, you know, actually you could probably date it back to the early days of Tory austerity, where the biggest things that were cut were long-term infrastructure projects. And this we're seeing...
And experienced prison officers as well.
And what we're seeing is the result of many of those decisions coming to bear fruit now, when, you know, we were on the long-term decisions now. These are the kind of 10, 15, 20-year decisions that were cancelled.
I mean, this is sticking plaster patch-up jobs.
And that has led to these sticking plaster patch-up jobs. And, you know, what they are desperately trying to avoid is a situation which happened when Labour came into office, which is that they had these riots over the summer and in several places across the country. They were genuinely almost nowhere to put the people who they were arresting. So I think in the northwest of Shabana Mahmood, I think, talked about this on the record, that when she became Justice Secretary, there were 5 prison places that she had to play with at one point in one part of the country. And what you don't want is a sudden incident like that, where you have to have mass arrests for various reasons, and then you have to keep people in police cells and police stations. And essentially, you know, you might get to a point where police just can't make arrests. Those are the kinds of decisions that he doesn't want to... You want to try and preempt that and keep some space, and that's why you have to make these very difficult decisions. But none of that will be any comfort at all to the victims of these people being let out early. It's a terrible decision, and the consequence to have to make it, and the consequence of long-term prioritisation.
Yeah, I mean, we're all trying to work out how many as well. You know, there's one part that says, under changes in the Sentencing Act, some 6,000 offenders were set to be let out of prison in September after serving 1/3 of their sentence rather than half. in a bid to ease prison overcrowding. And elsewhere, people that were due to serve 2/3 will now be serving half. So there'll be even more of those. So we're talking about thousands of people coming out of jail early, aren't we, Lucy?
Yeah, and interestingly, you know, the Conservatives reform have commented tonight, the Conservatives saying that the U-turn doesn't go far enough. And interestingly, actually kind of crediting themselves, saying that this is a bit of a campaign win for them, because this is something Kemi Badenoch has spoken an awful lot about. But again, the point is, I mean, I was at a press conference last week with Kemi Badenoch about this very issue. She was with victims of grooming gang offences there, talking about how it was very important that their perpetrators aren't released early from prison. There we go, they'll look at this tonight and say, we achieved something there. But there, Kemi Badenoch said that under the Conservative government, we built thousands of prison spaces. And actually, I stood up and said, that's not true, because you look at figures and it was a net increase of, what, about 500, because so many were decommissioned because of their condition. So, to be honest, Labour were handed a situation where not enough prison spaces had been built. They have to do something about it. And as you say, it's sticking plaster politics. It's a desperate situation, isn't it? That's what it is.
Yeah. Full stop, end of show, I think. Anyway, yeah. And
everything that we're
talking
about.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what we need.
Thanks for the great sum up. It was brilliant. Lucy, thanks very much indeed for that. Now, Donald Trump has issued yet another warning to Iran after a day in which the president's hot and cold attitude to the conflict was again apparent. Earlier, he claimed that negotiations with Iran were taking place today after calling off military action over the weekend. Well, Tehran, not for the first time, said the president's account of events were untrue. Well, speaking in the Oval Office this evening, Mr. Trump warned that this is the last chance for Iran to make a deal or risk escalation.
The talks are going along. We were going to hit them very hard yesterday, very, very hard, harder than any attack. I think I can say, General, from a point of knowledge, any attack since World War II. That's pretty big. This is the last chance. This is not something that, if it doesn't happen, this is the last chance for them to sign a good document.
Well, quite frankly, it's easy to be lost, isn't it, Tony?
Yeah, I do find this story extremely difficult to follow. You've got to make it your full-time job, really, to follow what's going on in the Iranian peace negotiations. I mean, the key moment was a few weeks ago, wasn't it, when we really thought that the peace was going to hold, and since then it has just been backwards and forwards and all over the place. I've been really interested to see how our new government is changing this picture in terms of the rebuilding and policing of the Strait of Hormuz, because there has been some movement on that. And actually it seems that Marco Rubio has been trying to recruit Wes Streeting, the new Defence Secretary, and Ed Miliband, the new Foreign Secretary, to try and convince some Europeans that they should still be rowing in behind the Americans amid a bit of concern in European capitals. I think that things are not perhaps going quite as well as they should be. So there is a bit of UK domestic politics here. As for what is going on between Donald Trump and Iran, I think is anyone's guess, really. It doesn't seem like they can even agree between themselves.
Yeah, interesting. And what do we know about, UK trips to America, conversations being had in person? Are we allowed to...
Yeah, I think you will see something. You will see something along those lines this week. I think one of the first sort of direct engagements between the British government and Donald Trump's administration. Andy Burnham seems to make a relatively good impression on Donald Trump at first. I think that I was talking to someone in Number 10 about this today, and it was a bit like they sort of likened it a bit to how Trump can get on with Mamdani, who's the sort of very left-wing mayor of New York, because he just kind of likes winners. He likes the guys who are kind of on top. They've won a big election victory, they've taken over. That he's attracted to that kind of person. So actually, your kind of politics, he can put that aside a bit if you're a winner, if you come across as a kind of winning guy.
So under that logic, he'll hate Burnham then, who is
he didn't stand for any election.
Won a victory in Mayfield and deposed of his, that ruthlessness, I think, is probably quite interesting to him.
And he did talk again about tonight, didn't he? Well, apart from he said Iran was unbelievably duplicitous, he said, in denying talks aimed at ending the conflict were being held. But on Andy Burnham, he said he thought that he and Andy Burnham were going to have a very good relationship, as he again stressed the need for the UK to tackle immigration and open up North Sea oil, claiming Britain was currently a bankrupt country. We refer ourselves to our previous answers, but there we are. The US president said the nation was sitting on top of gold. This is interesting as BP announces it wants to sell its North Sea assets. Anyway, so, you know, he's feeling his way with that. Is he, you know, with Andy Burnham?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, he's actually being a lot more vocal about what he wants to see from British domestic policy than he was after Keir Starmer took over after the last election. He did give him a bit of grace and get his feet under the table. Andy Burnham, on the other hand, he's just making demands as soon as he's arrived.
They're the same demands, to be fair.
They are the same demands, and maybe he's getting impatient. But yes, it will be interesting to see the kind of rapport between the two of them. I mean, Starmer had a surprising amount of success with building a rapport with Trump, but, you know, as what Trump would see as a career federal prosecutor, which is what Keir Starmer was, he's basically his least favourite category of person with the kind of legal issues he's had himself. So, yeah, I mean, maybe Ben will have more luck.
Yeah, very interesting.
I think that they might. I think they might be able to build some kind of rapport. Actually, I think Burnham's a bit more at ease with himself than Keir Starmer ever was, and you know, and also I think there's probably people around Andy Burnham that think, you know, a bit of tension with Trump in terms of the electorate is not the worst thing in the world, and on a human level, he's probably broadly able to be friendly with just about anyone.
Yeah, OK. Lots more still to come, including this story that Sky News has had a personal interest in, the jail for a woman who stole hundreds of thousands from a pensioner before Sky News tracked her down in Tenerife.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
Who's funnier?
Being a Sky News journalist. A special edition of The World with me, Yalda Hakim.
Pakistan has the right to respond.
You're like, what?
A historic day here today. Congratulations, this is a huge moment. But what happens now?
Hear that whistle and that crunch? We know that they're coming from the south of the city where there's a column of Russian armoury. I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul. Look at that sheet of flames, and that has happened within minutes, and now it's coming from both sides and it's moving this way.
The best thing about being a Sky News journalist? I'm going to take you behind the scenes here for Election Night Live. They have gone up and up. Being a Sky News journalist. Ed Conway, Sky News. Is anyone going to talk to us? Mortgage rates did go up very sharply during your time in office. Here it is.
First off, just the scale of what we're looking at.
Our data shows it's been happening. Question is why it hasn't been stopped.
Now, England and Wales both experienced their driest July on record last month, according to provisional Met Office data. It came as the Health Secretary urged everyone to look out for vulnerable people, and the Farmers Union warned that the hot, dry weather could lead to a shortage of some foods. Here is our climate reporter, Victoria Seabrook.
Britain is baking. Shrinking reservoirs, scorched land, and hosepipe bans. Pain for those whose livelihoods depend on this parched earth, those growing the food this island needs.
So this is milling wheat.
Arable farmer Matt Cully is harvesting wheat 3 weeks early and 50% less than he expected.
I'm going to lose around £20,000 just on my milling wheat crop. And that is being mirrored around the area that we work in. We've got very expensive fertiliser bills for next year already. How's that going to get paid for? Those are the real questions that we're asking ourselves. And do we ultimately not even think about planting this autumn for next year because we haven't got the money to invest?
It means food price rises are likely and shortages down the line not being ruled out.
What we've already seen is that there's been a shortage of cucumbers, and that's because of what's happening with the heat wave in other countries. So it really depends exactly which crops and it's going to be. It could be some of our irrigated crops where growers may run out of water. It could be some of our fruit crops, depending on what happens at harvest.
These maize crops are about 4 foot tall right now, but they should be at least twice the height, far above my head, and you shouldn't even be able to see me through them. But since the farmer planted them in March, he's had just 1/3 of the rainfall that he would have expected. And these lower leaves should be bright green, but have withered to a crisp. And of course, it's a problem much bigger than just this field. England and Wales have just recorded their driest July on records going back 190 years. New Met Office data suggests England received just 6.5 millimetres of rain on average, Wales 9.3 millimetres, both around 90% less than what we'd expect for July. And it's not just farmers feeling the heat. Much of England under a yellow or amber heat health alert, with temperatures over 30 degrees expected to strain both vulnerable people and the NHS as a whole.
Well, we have a major capital investment programme underway now across the NHS. And of course, we're now having to look at making sure the new neighbourhood health centres, new hospital building programmes is all building in the ability to respond to high heat temperatures. This is also about prevention and in the community, making sure that all of us know to look out for elderly relatives, for those who are vulnerable.
Britain's hot and dry weather is still taking us by surprise, but it's sadly in line with what climate scientists have forecast. Some changes to our climate now already baked in. Just how dramatic they are is not set in stone. Victoria Seabrook, Sky News.
Yeah, England and Wales, the driest and sunniest Julys since respective records began, the driest going back to a whopping 1836. It has been truly extraordinary. Are we underprepared? Do minds now need to be focused, do you think?
Well, I think in two key ways we are, in terms of long-term planning and our ability to deal with these crises on a national level. I think we are. I mean, look at, for instance, the amount of investment that's gone into building reservoirs and building schools and hospitals that are able to withstand the heat. So no, in that case, but also on an individual level, I don't think we're prepared. And look at the daily commute. Look at getting on the tube. It's becoming unsustainable for a lot of people because it's so unpleasant. Meanwhile, people don't have air conditioning in their houses, and they can't sleep at night. It contributes to a sort of miserable summer that I hope we'll be able to do something about.
In days gone by, we'd dream about a summer like this, wouldn't we? England clocking up 305.6 hours of sunshine across the month of July, surpassing the previous July record set in 1911. I mean, you remember those wet summers we've had. I mean, but there's a sort of unsustainable sense of this, isn't there? As you watch trees in your garden die, and the farmers watch their cattle eating what is effectively stalks of hay and fields, which should be green grass at this time of year.
And I think the difference to what you're saying about, enjoying a heatwave summer like this, where you can go take your kids to the beach every day, that would be great if it was, the occasion, was something that was occasional, rather than what feels like a new way of every summer, reaching these very, very high temperatures and just living in a country which is just not equipped for those high temperatures, where houses are built to retain heat rather than to cool down, where you see now fairly routine hosepipe bans during the summer, which means that people's gardens wither and die, things that become people's kind of pride and joy over it tempers your enjoyment of what should be a lovely summer temperatures when you're having that kind of suffering.
Yeah, and the sense that it's too hot to go out. Although solar power is doing well, it accounted for 14.4% of all electricity generated in Britain in July, which broke the previous monthly record, which was only set in May, of 12.4%. The average, 9.6%. And in fact, on one day, Sunday, July the 12th, at its peak that day, solar power generated 44% of our electricity between 10:30 to midday. So, I'm really
There are more solar farms.
Well, exactly, over those brown fields. Yeah, precisely. Now, a convicted fraudster who stole nearly £300,000 from a vulnerable pensioner before fleeing the country has had 2 months added to her 6-year prison sentence. Pamela Gwinnett was arrested in Tenerife last month after Sky News tracked her down. She was sentenced at Preston Crown Court this morning. Sky's Phoebe Southworth was there.
Do you regret taking the money, Pamela?
Under arrest for failure to appear. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence. Do not mention my questions when you later rely in court.
This is the moment fugitive fraudster Pamela Gwinnett, who raided £300,000 from a pensioner's life savings, then went on the run. Pamela, would you like to say sorry to Joan Green's family? Was finally arrested. Gwinnett defrauded Joan Green while pretending to be her carer during the pandemic.
She's not sorry. She never will be. She's shown no remorse. It's just been a horrendous time, and we're just glad now it's finally over.
It's had a massive impact on us. The amount of hours that we've spent trying to get her brought to justice, the phone calls, the emails, the gathering of information, the stress it's caused on us, it's been unbearable. But today, to finally see her in that dock and get sent down's a big weight lifted off our shoulders. It's like the nightmare's over now.
She spent the money on luxuries like Botox treatments and expensive meals. Well, last year a judge gave her a 6-year prison sentence. That's now been increased by 2 months because she ran away for more than a year. Before Gwinnett's extradition, Sky News confronted her at the luxury apartment where she'd been hiding in Tenerife. You're supposed to be serving a prison sentence. You got 6 years last year and you're here in Tenerife. Why aren't you back in the UK?
Because I've got an appeal going on.
This is where Gwinnett had been hiding in Tenerife. She was notorious among her neighbours, who put up posters with her face on them to say she was a wanted woman.
It must be horrible to think that somebody's living it large on a sunny island when your family's still grieving.
What is your message to her? Is it to leave?
Go home and face justice.
Sky News joined police officers who arrested Gwinnett at Manchester Airport after she'd been extradited.
We're so grateful towards Bolton Police, the team, yourself and Sky News for raising this case and highlighting the abuse that goes on, and these people need to be stopped. We can now move on knowing that justice has been served for Menan.
Phoebe Southworth, Sky News.
Yes, we'll keep an eye on reaction to that. But right now, let's take a look at what is making the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers, starting with The Guardian, which leads on the news that broke this evening, that rapists, child sex abusers and groomers will be excluded from the early release plans to ease overcrowding in prisons. That's grooming gangs. The Times reporting that those convicted of manslaughter, though, will still be eligible for early release. The Telegraph says that because of that, the killers of PC Andrew Harper will still be freed early. Same story for The Sun. Cop killers will go free, is how the paper reports it, with PC Harper's widow labelling it disgusting. Meantime, Farage's sinking ship is the headline in the Mirror, with the paper reporting that Reform UK is in chaos, with experts criticising its plans to use the Navy to stop migrant boat crossings. The eye goes with news of the drought, with new figures today from the Met Office showing that England and Wales had their driest July since records began back in 1836. The Daily Express has news of trials of what has been described as a game-changer drug, which could help people to better control high blood pressure. Financial Times goes with a legal challenge. Apple has launched against the government's bid to gain access to encrypted iPhone data. The embattled FIFA president is on the front of the Star, with the paper claiming Gianni Infantino wants Donald Trump to help save his job. The Metro has a story about a 26-year-old man who lost 15 stone after taking the weight loss jab Manjaro, while reporting a study which shows around 4% of Brits or Britons are unemployed due to obesity. So let's take a look in more detail at those papers with Tony and with Jessica. In fact, both of your newspapers and The Times all going on the news that broke at about 10:30 this evening, which is Andy Burnham's intervention into the early release of prisoners, which means that certain categories will not be freed or not be eligible for early release.
Yeah, that's rapists, child sexual abusers and those who perpetrated grooming gang offences. There's a lot of questions still, I think, over what this will mean. Keir Starmer had plans to release up to 6,000 offenders. The MOJ isn't saying tonight how many of those will now remain in prison because of these changes that Andy Burnham have put in place, and they've essentially declined to release those numbers. And they've also declined to say when prisons will be full again and when the next phase of this might have to, be revisited, and whether there are already plans for that next phase. So they're not prepared to talk about those things. And even, some of this will come as a relief, of course, to some of the victims the perpetrators and will now not be freed. But of course, and as we're seeing on many of the front pages tonight, there will be victims who will feel very unfair. This is very unjustly treated.
Yes, and domestic abuse not part of that category, which I know some from the Prison Officers Association, for example, were hoping would be included. And yet, as part of this, they are bringing in what they called a prison within a prison, which means that when you're released, you're better monitored effectively. So, I mean, should people feel more confident, do you think, with changes that are being brought in? And this is being pushed from September to October.
Well, that's right. I think it's been pushed from September to October more so they've got a bit more time to implement this and they've got a chance to put this through parole officers. But yes, there is a new system for monitoring people. It is a system that was designed under Keir Starmer. It's not Andy Burnham's invention. But he has said that he wants people to automatically have these extra restrictions on them, especially including GPS tracking. That's kind of the big new one that they think is going to make a big difference, is being able to see where these offenders are at all times. They can virtually geofence a particular area, and then if someone enters that area, and they're breaching their bail conditions by doing that, then it can send them an alert. They've got various ways of of monitoring people. Yeah, that's I think what they're hoping is going to convince people that this is going to be all right and is going to stop people from reoffending, because, of course, that is always the risk with these schemes. When you release people, they go out and reoffend, and then you have a load more victims and you have a load more negative headlines. So that, I think, is an issue. One other thing that I would just say is that Number 10 is quite keen that people don't use the phrase early release, which, as you can see from the headlines, tomorrow's papers, it hasn't gone very well. No, but they say that and they have got a point, that under previous governments, and especially under the Tories, an early release scheme is basically kind of an emergency break glass measure where you just release people all in one go. They say they brought in a new system whereby people's sentences are monitored, and if people haven't been violent in prison, then they will automatically become eligible for early release, as opposed to someone being chucked out of a prison because
people
they haven't
expecting
got
to serve
enough
half their sentence will now serve a third, and those expecting to spend 2/3 of their sentence in jail will now spend a half. I mean, they're being released early. It's quite straightforward.
Well, they're being released early, but they're being released early in a way that's been planned in advance.
OK.
And therefore it's not early release, is the spin.
OK,
but,
nice.
As you can see. Not everyone buys it.
Well, Andy Burnham has been writing for your paper, saying that he pushed to the very limits of what is possible, but could not exempt more criminals without the prison system collapsing within months. In the meantime, we learned from the Daily Telegraph that Andy Burnham is on his holiday after 2 weeks in the job. I'm normally really supportive of Prime Ministers and Ministers having a good break over the summer because the job is relentless. But 2 weeks after taking over, when you did not face an electorate for that job, is that Is that the right thing to do, do you think?
Look, I think people will argue, I think, about whether it's the right time for him to be taking a holiday. I understand that he did actually delay the holiday that was meant to start over the weekend, and in order to do that press conference in Dover about small boats that he did on Sunday. Number 10 stressing that he's expected to be working over this period of time, expected to return immediately if there was an issue. And I think if we're to be charitable about this, I think it is important for politicians to have rest, to spend time with their family. I think you've all seen those, when it gets a bit too much for them, they need to have the decision-making ability that everybody needs a rest on a holiday, and lots of people in Westminster will be having one. But of course, I think. Of course, I think the timing of it might raise some eyebrows, of course.
Yeah. Well, there's all sorts of things on the Prime Ministerial plate, as we know, including the Eye is reporting about deadly strikes that hit a Russian resort. The Russians pointing out it killed 7 people, including 3 children. 40 were wounded in a Black Sea holiday resort in what it said was a deliberate Ukrainian drone attack on civilians, which would make it more controversial. As we know, Russia normally targets civilians in Ukraine.
Yeah, this does seem like a bit of an inversion of the normal story that we see about reports in Ukraine, and it's interesting. I mean, as always with these stories,
these are the dramatic pictures of it.
Yes, this drone that lands in the water and then there's an explosion.
Yeah.
But yeah, as always, the interesting thing about this is actually the ability of the Ukrainians to fly these long-range drones and be able to get into civilian areas, which you would assume would be heavily defended. But yeah, of course, we don't know in this case whether or not that was deliberate or
what the intended target was.
What the purpose was. As you say, it's not usual for Ukraine to be targeting Russian civilians, and you would assume that there's some kind of explanation behind that.
Yeah. Let's go to page 2 of The Times, shall we? Which is a digital ticketing app that uses GPS to track a rail passenger's location so that they can try to stop fare evasion. Is fare evasion, a growing problem? Do you think a bit like shoplifting for people?
Yeah, I mean, I think it costs around £400 million a year, fare evasion. So it is a problem for the industry. And I think we've seen politicians kind of pick up on this. Robert Jenrick was one of the ones highlighting how many people sort of walk through the barriers in the tube. So this one will track a rail passenger's journey to avoid this idea. You buy just a very short, cheaper ticket in between the last couple of stations, and then you can leave the ticket barriers and you don't have to pay the full fare, and it should hopefully stop something like that. Although, I have to say that lots of passengers will say rail prices have become so, insanely unaffordable for many people over the course of, especially if you want to travel at peak times, that that this is something again which is sort of clamping down on ordinary law-abiding passengers paying quite a lot for their ticket and now having their movements monitored. But hopefully it will stop some of this fare evasion.
Yeah, lots more newspapers to come, including news about chips. Chips could be scarce, potato crops. We'll talk about that and plenty more after the break.
jubilation in the streets, while some emotional. This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party.
I'm Neville Lazarus, and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi.
Companies like these are helping India in its trajectory to be a serious player in space exploration. Sky News, get the full story first.
Welcome back as our look at tomorrow's newspapers continue with Tony and with Jessica, including the weather, the eye, pictured there, the driest July in 190 years. We've got, dramatic pictures aplenty for anybody sending a drone up to take a photo. But, we're really seeing the consequences now, aren't we?
Yeah, and of those, I think it's been some places 46 days or so without any rain whatsoever. That's just talk about killing crops is absolutely destroying people's gardens. The parkland, you're taking your children to play in the park over the summer holidays, you're falling over and you're basically on bare earth, aren't you? And I think, this is becoming the norm because of the way that the climate is changing, and something that as we've discussed, we're really going to have to adapt to.
Yeah, and farmers already dipping into winter feed. Your paper, The Telegraph, picking up on Britain's potato crop, and chips. Chips are down is the headline.
Yeah, that's right. We've spoken to an East Anglian potato-growing conglomerate supplying many of Britain's major supermarkets, which says that the potatoes are just not growing because of the heat. In fact, there's a very striking quote from Jim Wayman, who says, "We've been chucking water on them, but in this heat, they're not growing. It's like watering a corpse," he says.
Oh, no.
But you just actually,
goodness.
think about the impact that this actually has on these farmers and, on all of us, of course, who go out and buy a bag of crisps, but also on these farmers who already had a very difficult winter in terms of their crop growth.
Are we going to have to look at emergency grants for them, do you think? Because normally they'd be feeding on lush green grass, and they're feeding off haystalks effectively, aren't they?
Well, yeah, and in your package earlier on in the programme, there was a farmer who was talking about losing £20,000 worth of his crop, and already being hit with higher fertiliser fees for the sowing season because of the war in Iran and the high cost of that. So, it's really dire straits for our farmers, and of course that has a knock-on impact on all of us who go out and buy our fruit and veg.
Yeah, and plenty of them talking about, is it worth doing the planting in the autumn because of those high prices? Again, what that knock-on effect means for food prices in the coming year, for whether that's animal feed. Here, that he's talking about how McCain was bought up his kind of last stores of potatoes because they're so worried about future shortages. And we never thought we'd be having these kinds of discussions about food shortages in Britain. But this sudden, quite rapid change in the climate is really driving it.
Yeah, food security, resilience, whether we should build on green belt because you can produce food on green belt. It throws everything to focus. And, people going on the holidays are watching very carefully where wildfires are. Here is one in Greece, in West Attica, they say, in Greece, on the front page of The Guardian, which talked, I think the winds of ease, but they talked about gales in Greece, and it's almost impossible to put out fires when the wind blows and makes the fires jump, which we've seen certainly in parts of Europe which have been suffering these massive blazes.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary picture, this one here. Looking on the left there, you can see there's actually a tree that's gone completely up. And on first glance, I thought that was just another bit of flame, but that's actually a tree that's completely ablaze. And as you say, the wind is just blowing it all across.
Yeah.
Look at the holidaymakers who were in the south of France last week. They all struggled as well. Now it's in Greece. Often we see them in Spain, Portugal. All those kind of Mediterranean destinations for holidaymakers are now becoming a bit of a risk.
Yeah, farmers from across the continent warned of a slump in food production and rising costs, as we've already discussed for the UK. Should we go to the front page of the Times, which is about the diagnosis of autism, which the paper says, or quotes as saying, has become a catch-all diagnosis that is applied to so many people that it risks being almost useless. And they're quoting one of Britain's leading experts on the condition.
Yeah, and she is talking about how, you know, in its previous usage, autism might have been used to identify quite a small group of children with very severe difficulties with communication, with behaviour, with social interaction. And now people feel like there's, you know, the definition should be widened to, and lots of people getting diagnosed with adulthood, people who've experienced those difficulties in communication and social interaction in their childhood, feel perhaps they weren't diagnosed as a child and now finding, I think people also finding comfort and help in the fact that they can get an autism diagnosis later in life. But she's saying here, arguing what will be, I think, probably quite a controversial argument, but an interesting one, that it's expanded so much to the point at which the term has gone beyond what it was intended to mean.
Quick look at the front page of the Metro, which is a baby boy who's undergone what they call groundbreaking surgery for a rare condition while still inside his mother's womb.
This is an absolutely incredible story. I mean, this child had a rare condition which involved his intestines being on the outside of his body while he was in his mother's womb. But what they were able to do at this specialist hospital in Texas was operate on the mother, return the intestines into the baby, and then she carries the baby to full term. So it wasn't an operation that happened, you know, while she was already giving birth. This is an operation that's happened while she's still pregnant. That's
all hail the surgeons. Amazing.
Yeah.
And then let's take a look at the Daily Star. Gianni Infantino, boss of, beleaguered boss of FIFA, I think we can say, has repeatedly tried to call President Trump as he battles to save his job.
Well, he's desperate for any endorsement or support, isn't he? Clearly losing support from UEFA, losing support also, we think, from the North American and Central American associations. He's still got some support, we should say, in other parts of the world, but, he's desperate to get anyone to kind of endorse his bid to cling on to power. And it seems like, it doesn't seem so far like Donald Trump is picking up those calls. I think once you're not a winner to Donald Trump, then I think
then you're off the list.
Yeah.
He is looking for allies of note to publicly support him, it says here. Both of you, thank you so much. Tony, Jessica, lovely to look through tomorrow's newspapers with you. Much appreciated. Thank you. We've got the sport coming up next and have already lost their manager and two of their most influential players this summer. Are Newcastle set to lose another key player ahead of the new Premier League season?
An interview that lasted nearly 5 minutes. We talked about Prime Minister Starmer. We talked about the special relationship with who he said. It was a jam-packed interview. I'll tell you what he told me, and I'll explain why you can't hear the call.
I'm Mark Stone, and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Have you seen what Donald Trump's been up to? In the Rose Garden, in the East Wing.
100 days in and back with the grassroots of this MAGA movement.
It feels a little bit like he's a king, not a president.
He is a king.
I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too.
Everything in America feels kind of torn in two right now, and it has been an intense few weeks for Minneapolis.
How many more people have to die?
This is not America.
A large and growing protest movement. They're vocal and they're angry.
Are these immigration rates?
Unbelievable we've come to this.
We just arrived in Doha, just ahead of President Trump, and look at that. The horse-backed military, and beyond them, the skyline of a city transformed.
There seems to be some sort of a shooting, what appear to be shots fired at the White House Correspondents' Dinner.
What do America's Christian faithful make of the president's pop at the Pope?
The ones that vote for him are going to vote for him through thick and thin.
Before anybody criticizes the Pope, they need to think more than twice.
Mark Stone from Sky News. Will you stop buying Russian energy? Is there any assurance for Palestinian self-determination? Of course. It's a big shift by President Trump.
This post of Trump, it's a big shift. It's a big shift. It's very positive.
Sky News, the full story first.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
Who's funnier?
Being a Sky News journalist.
A special edition of The World with me, Yalda Hakim.
Pakistan had the right to respond.
You're like, what?
Historic day here today. Congratulations, this is a huge moment. But what happens now?
What's the best thing about being a Sky News journalist?
Who's funnier?
Being a Sky News journalist.
A special edition of The World with me, Yalda Hakim.
Pakistan had the right to respond.
You're like, what?
Historic day here today. Congratulations, this is a huge moment. But what happens now?
Hear that whistle and that crunch? We know that they're coming from the south of the city where there's a column of Russian armoury. I'm Alex Crawford and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul. Look at that sheet of flames, and that has happened within minutes, and now it's coming from both sides and it's moving this way.
Well, let's get the latest report now. Here's David.
Right, here we are. First day back, I suppose. It kind of feels like, doesn't it? How is the feeling? Because everything feels quite new around here.
Now, of course, first day of pre-season with the full squad outside on the pitch today. And the first team meeting, talking about our season ambition and who we want to be. It's been a great day, and of course I'm very excited, yeah.
How does it feel? It feels odd coming here. I haven't been shouted at by Katie McCabe or given a big hug by Beth Mead. There is a different feeling here today.
Yeah, you'll get them at some point, just not around Arsenal. Yeah, of course, they are legends of the club on what they've done for Arsenal, and for me it was a pleasure working with them as well. In both of them there's so much football intelligence, and learned from them, and I think Katie with her leadership, her vocality on the pitch, same with Beth, very energetic, vocal on the pitch. Of course we'll miss that, but yeah, it's a new season and we have a lot of great players coming in, and there will be new dynamics, and we have a lot of leadership in the squad as it stands, and then it's always interesting in the group dynamics, how are these different roles going to be filled with the squad that we have right now, but it looks really, really good.
The decision to sort of transform the squad, to move on from certain players, to kind of maybe get a bit younger, was taken some months ago. Was there any kind of nerves about sort of the process whilst you were going through it, especially at the end of the season when your team was playing well?
Yeah, nerves, I don't know what word I would use, but you're always, because it's decisions for the player, for the team, for the club, and you want to make sure that for all parties involved the decisions are right. So of course there's been a lot of thinking going into these decisions. If I would say it's made me nervous, I don't think so. But yeah, I'm just really happy with Beth and Katie, the way they've ended their Arsenal time, because I think they've been playing on a really high level and have been really important for us. Likewise for Laia Kodina, Vic Belova. Manuela was, of course, unfortunately out with an injury, but all these players hopefully feel like the end of their Arsenal time has been positive.
But you haven't, lots of clubs, I suppose, when they were sort of going out and starting a new structure, would have gone out and probably signed a load of young players, but you've signed quite a few players at their peak, or certainly sort of hoping to be at that peak. Was that a conscious decision?
Yeah, so of course there's a lot of different factors that we look at when we go and recruit and build a team that we think can be most successful for us. They need to be good fits for us. So how I see the game growing, athleticism, I think is really important because
David, thank you. Let's take a look at the weather now.
Dinner under the stars tonight?
That reminds me of our travel insurance.
You mean All Clear Skies?
All Clear Travel Insurance sponsors Sky News Weather.
So this week will bring some much-needed rain, but probably not much to the drought-stricken south. Scotland will have a mostly wet start tomorrow, with heavy rain in places, while Ireland and the western parts of the UK will see a scattering of showers. Scotland will see prolonged rain becoming confined to the north during the morning, with locally heavy and potentially thundery showers following into southern parts. Elsewhere, sunny spells, scattering of showers, some torrential and thundery, concentrated in the west. Eastern England staying mainly dry.
All Clear Travel Insurance proudly sponsors Sky News Weather.
Well, that was the wrap. Thank you so much for watching. We will have all the top stories coming up next here on Sky News in the Midnight News. Don't go away.